I was challenged to see if I could paint a Space Marine using the same clean, controlled approach I used on my Farsight model. No extra layers, no overworking, just smart choices. For that, I picked a Cataphractic Terminator using a workflow that relies on controlled zenithals, oil pin washes, and a precise edge highlight to do most of the heavy lifting. So let's see how far a clean approach can really go. Over a white primer, I'll be laying down the new Kaleido paints using a simple zenithal approach. For this, I selected a couple of colors from their primary set, starting with an orange sprayed from below, followed by an orange-yellow sprayed from above. In both cases, I am spraying at roughly a 45-degree angle, letting the light direction naturally define the volumes of the armor. One of the peculiarities of these paints in particular is their lacquer-like finish, even though they are acrylic-based. This gives them a surface that is both extra resistant and glossy, which will come in handy later on in the process. While the zenithal shading alone already looked good enough to continue, I decided to push the contrast a bit further and give the paint job more punch. To do that, I added pure yellow sprayed directly from above and brown sprayed directly from below. The brown, however, was mixed with some thinner that came in the box, to turn it into a subtle glaze. If earlier I was working at around a 45-degree angle, this time I'm going almost straight on, about 90 degrees or maybe 80 at most. With that done, I'd say a roughly 50% of the model is already finished just from this stage. From there, I moved on to laying down the remaining base coats. These consisted of a steel color for the metallic areas, a brown for the leather, and a charcoal tone for what will eventually become the black details. The reason I chose charcoal instead of pure black is to leave myself room to shade down those areas later. If I were to start from a black right away, there would be nothing darker left to work with when trying to create shadows. And speaking of shadows, for the next step I mixed up an oil wash consisting of 1 part burnt umber, 1 part black and 4 parts white spirits. The solvent I'm using here is an odorless one, which you can easily find at most art stores. By using an oil wash, I am going for a pin washing approach. As you can see, it takes nothing more than lightly touching the tip of the brush to a recess for the paint to flow through it on its own. This is especially useful when aiming for a very clean finish, since the low surface tension of the oil paints results in a crisp, well-defined panel line, without staining the surrounding areas too much. That said, looking back at it now, my mix might have been just a bit too strong. A slightly higher ratio of brown would have probably resulted in a more subtle, better integrated panel lining that doesn't stand out quite as much, but I'll leave that judgment up to you. Aside from their low surface tension, which allows oils to flow into the recesses so effortlessly, the other big advantage, which some people consider a disadvantage, is their long drying time. In reality, because we are using such a small amount of paint, everything should be fully dry by the next day. But that extended working time allows us to clean any spills or mistakes without feeling like we're racing against the clock. What I recommend here is waiting for the solvent to evaporate, which usually takes around 10 minutes. After that, you can use your finger, a Q-tip or even an eyeshadow applicator to gently clean the oil from the areas where they have spilled outside of the recess. What all these tools have in common is that they are large enough that they can physically reach into the recesses themselves. This keeps the panel line safe and untouched while you clean the surrounding surfaces. On top of that, the glossy finish of these paints not only helps the oil wash flow better, but also prevents streaking as you wipe the excess away, making the cleanup process even more forgiving. And here is how the model ended up looking after the cleanup was finished. Of course, some recesses will look better than others depending on how well they are sculpted, but as you can see, after a quick cleanup that took less than 5 minutes, everything is looking clean, readable and well defined. Still, there is one more step we can take to really push this model to the next level, and as you might imagine, that step is edge highlighting. Before moving on though, we need to get rid of that glossy finish, since it can make it harder for our paints to properly grip the edges we're about to highlight. To do that, I simply sprayed the model with a layer of matte varnish, and honestly, I gotta say the model already looks better with this finish. But let's move on to the palette and make it look even better. When it comes to proper edge highlighting, there are 3 things we are looking for. Aside from having a brush with a nice fine tip, we also want the correct dilution, so the paint flows smoothly as we run it along the edges, and the correct paint load, so that not too much paint comes out and our highlights stay thin and controlled. I'll be leaving links in the description to a couple of videos where I go much deeper into paint dilution and brush control, in case you want a more in-depth explanation. But as a general rule, twisting and gently pulling the brush while unloading the paint will naturally bring it to a fine tip, while also helping you feel how much paint is actually coming out of the bristles. For the highlight itself, instead of trying to run along the edge and relying on your pulse to keep a thin line, place your brush sideways, perpendicular to the edge. That way, there is nowhere for the brush to go except along that edge, making the process far more consistent and forgiving. Now, on some trickier areas, using only the side of the brush won't always be possible, and that's where a bit of practice and patience comes into play. This is one of those moments where it's important to remember that edge highlighting is a skill you build up over time, not something you master instantly. Your lines won't always be perfect, and that's completely fine. Every careful stroke is training your hand, and every small improvement adds up more than you might expect. So don't rush it and don't get discouraged if some areas take a few tries. This step isn't about speed, it's about control, confidence, and learning to trust your movements. And if you stick with it, you'll often surprise yourself with how clean and precise your work becomes. One quick tip that can really help here lies in your grip and posture. What I personally like to do is get a solid grip on the model with one hand, keeping it as stable as possible, while resting my brush hand against it to form a strong, steady contact point. On top of that, I rest both my arms on the table. This creates a kind of locked-in position, reducing unwanted movement and giving you much more control over every stroke. If you are interested in trying the paints I use in this video and supporting the channel at the same time, I'll be leaving an affiliate link to the Kaleido store in the description, including both the paints featured here and their airbrush selection. But a like and a comment also helps the channel a lot. With that said, thank you for watching all the way till the end. I hope you found the video helpful and I'll see you for the next one.